Welcome,
All right.
everyone, to the podcast. Our guest today is Blake Hall. Blake is a graduate of Vanderbilt University with a BS in economics. He's a former Army officer who served as a reconnaissance platoon leader on over 450 combat patrols throughout Iraq with zero casualties within the platoon. He received two Bronze Stars, one for heroism in combat, the other for exceptional performance targeting high level insurgent leadership. I mean, that's some of the highest accolades you can get as an Army officer. He's got an MBA from the Harvard Business School. He's written articles for Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, among others, and he's currently the co-founder and CEO of ID.me.
Mhm.
Blake, first, I would like to just thank you for your service. I know what it takes to sign up, especially post 9/11. I especially have something in my heart for the veterans that have signed up post 9/11. And
Sure.
I'd like to thank you and welcome you to the podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, Scott. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So I just kind of gave a brief biography, but
Mhm.
could you tell us a little bit more? How did you, what about a little bit more about your background and how did you end up in the army?
Yeah, you got it. I was a third generation soldier, so grandfather had lied about his age and enlisted when he was 16 years old. Um, family. My dad's side of the family is from Murphy, North Carolina, family of woodsmen and loggers, and it's 1942, so right after Pearl Harbor, and he ended up landing at Anzio as a Browning automatic rifleman.
Wow.
Fought his way up through the Alps, was standing guard on the Rhine when Germany surrendered, and he'd actually won a Bronze Star with Valor at a town in France called Saint Etienne with Third Infantry Division. My dad was enlisted, then got into West Point, graduated the top 10% of his class, was a career officer, finished as a colonel after his brigade command,
Well,
and then both my uncles, one is a retired first sergeant. He was the Alurs kind of team sergeant before he left, and then the other uncle is a retired sergeant first class. So it kind of runs in the blood
it's
in my family.
it's definitely in the blood. It sounds like.
Yeah,
So how did you end up? How did you end up in the army?
yeah.
What's kind of what path did you take to get into the army?
Well, I think when I went to RTC, it was 2000, so we were still a peacetime military. But I saw just how hard my dad worked on a daily basis, and it's funny. I actually the idea of the army and the structure and discipline was not something that kind of reached out and grabbed me, and I was super excited about. But I really just had a sense that I'd never fully appreciate what I have, the freedoms that we enjoy on a daily basis if I didn't serve. And so I ended up, I went in. I wanted to at least serve for 4 years just to give back to this country that I love. And just happened that while I was in the RTC program at Vanderbilt, 9/11 happened, and I think for many of your listeners, certainly that was a major inflection point in my life where I decided that day after watching Americans jump from a skyscraper in New York City that I wanted to be an Army Ranger, and I knew that we were going to go to war, and I knew that it was probably going to be a war that depended very heavily on the infantry.
Absolutely. So you graduated from Vanderbilt. You were commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming you went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and attended your infantry officer basic course.
Sure
Um,
did.
then you went to did you go to Ranger School?
I did, yeah. So I went down to Benning. I think I reported in August, finished up IOBC in November, and then had a 2 month break. Where I was snowbirding and started Ranger School. I think January 10th or 11th. Which was just bitter cold. My dad had actually worked with a guy who commanded Delta for a number of years, and he just said, if I have one piece of advice for your son, he is just don't go to Ranger School in the wintertime. And of course, I get my orders and I see January, and I'm like, oh, this
Uh,
is awesome. So yeah, so I successfully completed Ranger School. I wasn't the best ranger out there, but learned a lot about myself. Knew that I'd never quit, and certainly if I was going to stand in front of a platoon of soldiers when I was just 22 years old, there's no way in hell I'd do that without a Ranger tab on my shoulder. So
so for our listeners that maybe don't have a military background, can you give us kind of the 50,000 foot view of what's Ranger School, and did you learn anything there that you're still using at ID.me today?
Yeah, sure. So Ranger School, really, at its essence, it's a leadership school, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. You know, they think of the different branches, SEALs, Green Berets, everything else, and while all of those professions kind of layer on skills after the fact, advanced training, at the heart of it, Ranger School is really designed to teach combat leaders that they can function effectively under extreme duress. And the way the school's basically structured is that the first 8 days are called Ranger Assessment Phase, and that's really where most of the folks who are going to get weeded out. So anywhere from you know. 40 to 2/3 of the class, 40% to 2/3 of the class will get cut in those first 8 days. And then after that, you kind of go into your small unit patrolling tactics of Fort Benning. There's 3 phases of the school. Each one is 3 weeks. So after that first 8 day phase, you've got about 13 days left of kind of your small unit patrolling. If you successfully pass that course, you then go to mountain phase in Dahlonega, Georgia, where you learn mountaineering techniques. And then if you successfully pass that phase, at least for my class, we parachuted into Eglin Air Force Base down right outside of Destin, Florida for swamp phase, and that's the last 3 week phase of the course. And while you're in the school, you're getting about 5 to 6 hours of sleep per night. If you're not in the field, when you're in the field, you're getting about 3 to 3.5 hours of sleep per night, and it's not straight through. You maybe sleep for an hour and a half, stand watch for half an hour, sleep for another hour and a half, and then you're right into a 20-hour day where you're just running patrols nonstop.
So is there anything that from Ranger School that you kind of take with you and still apply as the CEO of ID.me?
Yeah, I think the most important lesson that I learned while I was there was that you never plan alone. You got so much talent around you, and I think there's this misconception that a leader has all the answers, and I think what the military really does a good job of is kind of getting you to understand what your strengths are, and then relying on experts who are around you to provide their opinions and their expertise and what the plan is, so that as a unit you bring out the best in the group that's around you, and certainly. Not just Ranger School, but even when you get into the regular Army, where you often have NCOs who are much more experienced than you, if you don't trust them to do their jobs and listen to them and let them help coach you and grow you, you will fail. And Ranger School is a great kind of introduction to that sort of leadership.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of weeks ago. I talked to someone I know who's your mentor, Kelly Purdue,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
he said one of the things that he learned, or just through his time in the military, about being a good leader is that there's times where you've also got to be a good follower.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like that same kind of principle is something you took out of Ranger School as well.
Yeah, to it is really important because ultimately, you've spent 2 months with these guys, you're sleep deprived. I went in at 195 pounds. I finished at 162. And ultimately, when it's your time to be the leader and your number gets called, if you kind of haven't put in the effort to be a good follower, your credibility is diminished when your leadership time comes up. And I think that's credibility is the heart of any leadership position. You have to have a voice that people respect. And Ranger School is very meritocratic. No rank. It doesn't matter what branch you're coming from. It's all based on your performance.
So you graduated from Ranger School at Fort Benning. Where did you go next?
So actually, while I was in Ranger School, I initially had orders to report to First Armored Division in Germany, and was hoping to kind of parlay that into a assignment in Vicenza, Italy, with the 173rd.
Yeah.
So while I was there, they were standing up a few Stryker brigades, and Strykers were new platforms that the military was developing, 20 tons, 8 wheels. They can do about 55 to 60 miles an hour, carry up to 12 dismounts. And so while I was in Ranger School, I found out my orders had been shifted, and I was either going to Fort Polk, Louisiana, Fort Drum, New York, or Fort Lewis, Washington. And I found out after the first phase that I was going to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is right outside of Seattle. And
Yeah, I know Fort Polk and I know Fort Drum. So yeah, you won the lottery out of those three.
Oh my God. I tackled my Ranger buddy. I was so happy. I was like, I don't want to go somewhere where the mosquitoes are bigger than I am, down at Fort Polk. But got assigned as a conventional platoon leader out of Fort Lewis. I spent about 5 months leading a platoon. They had been micromanaged by the platoon leader before me, so luckily, being raised by NCOs, I learned how to interact with quality NCOs and let them do their job. When in charge, be in charge, but let them do their job. And so that platoon went from one of the lowest performing in the battalion to the highest rated platoon out of 14. And the battalion commander picked me to be his recon platoon leader, which is typically given to the most senior platoon leader when I was still the second most junior out of lieutenants from both cohorts. So about second most junior, about 24 officers.
Wow, so that's impressive. So you took over the recon platoon. How was that transition? Was there any kind of friction with you being one of the youngest guys when typically they've got a senior first lieutenant in that role?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about that particular challenge was, I'd just gone through a transition where I'd taken a platoon that was underperforming to a really high level of proficiency, through and with a great team of NCOs. And I think, like any leader, hard work and performance gets rewarded with more hard work and performance. They took this platoon for me that I loved, and they put me into scouts. And the scout platoon actually had a lot of issues. There were guys who'd been there a long time. Standards had started to slip. I actually heard one scout make the comment that we can wear our shirt untucked and like grow our hair out longer because we're scouts. And oh man, so I went in and I kind of crushed that. But a big part of that was it was very much of a turnaround kind of project where I had to clear out a lot of the scout team leaders and personnel who'd been there and bring in new blood from the line.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't all just performance. It was, for some of them, they just literally been in scouts too long where they needed to go back to the line. We kind of needed fresh blood in the platoon. So I think I definitely had enough credibility built up for my performance in the field where I felt like I had a voice, that the folks around me respected. But it is really hard to take half of a platoon and send those guys back to the line and draft kind of a new half of a platoon and then reintegrate them. And we only had about 2 months before we deployed in order to do that before we went to combat.
Wow. Any parallels with that with ID.me or kind of starting a business?
Well, I think the hardest challenge, and I still continually struggle with this though, is figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of the people that are on your team. And I think to a large extent, the more time that you spend one-on-one with people, especially before you make kind of major sweeping decisions in front of a group, and what motivates them, where they want to be, you can make better decisions as a leader. And so the first thing that I've had to do with both ID.me and with the recon platoon was just make sure I had the right key leaders, the guys that I controlled in the positions. And I think one difference about a startup is that when I was at my recon platoon, commander said, "Hey, whoever you need, you give me names, and I'm going to pull them up into recon." Which God, to be a startup founder, like give me whatever 3 engineers you pick, you can bring them in. Unfortunately, you don't have that luxury. But so startups almost a little bit tougher because you've got to get somebody to buy into your vision, buy into your dream of what this company could be and the impact that it could make. And outside of the recruiting part, I think that is very much in common with my experience in the military. Is once you find the person that you want, a big part of making sure that they're on the same page is making sure that they're mission driven, that they believe in why they're waking up in the morning and coming into work, and that they know what direction the unit's headed in, and that's been core both to the military and to business. I think General Petraeus said it best. He said, the first rule of leadership is get the big ideas right, and that's the foundation of everything else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you've taken over the recon platoon, and now can you talk us through you deploy what's the climate like in Iraq at the time that you deployed?
Yeah, sure. And I think for me as a young leader, combat and in Iraq in particular is what has shaped me, more than any other event the commanders had around me. But we landed in Iraq in July of 2006. We'd spent a week in Kuwait, late June, 130-degree temps. The Golden Mosque in Samarra had just been bombed, and it's a sacred Shia shrine, so that really kicked off the sectarian warfare in that country. We landed in Mosul, which is predominantly Sunni, and my platoon was given a mission where we were just going to target high value targets. So didn't have to worry about kind of foreign internal defense and partnership and all the other stuff that the military is focused on. We kind of converted the platoon into a SWAT team, for lack of a better analogy, and day or night had a 20-minute standard that within receipt of an alert, we were going to go out and kill or capture, that target that we were turned on to.
What are some of the leadership challenges? Obviously, just going into combat, one, but then two, getting this high profile mission to target high level insurgents. What are some of the challenges you had?
Yeah, well, I think the thing I love about the position I ended up in the military and about this particular mission was it was very entrepreneurial. There's a large degree of latitude given to the recon PL, and even before we were going out, just to have the commander say, "Hey, I trust you to execute this mission set and to figure out how we can do this most effectively," is just an incredible mandate to be given as a leader. And I think oftentimes people forget that in order for a leader to do his job effectively, his boss has got to have tools to go ahead and kind of have that autonomy and be proactive. And so when we first started targeting these high value targets, our success rate was between 15 to 20%. When the theater average I think was somewhere around 40 to 42%. So it was very low. And it wasn't until months where we started to kind of come in line with theater averages in terms of our success rate on patrols. But then, and this trend continued throughout the rest of the deployment, our capture rate kind of steadily crept through average. And then, by the end of the first 6 months that we spent in Mosul, we were 10 to 15 percentage points higher than the theater average in terms of our success rate, and had made several high profile captures of, brigade level targets at that point. So, just figuring out, obviously I can't talk sources and methods, but having a great group of guys that after every mission, you just figure out what went wrong, what do we do right, how is the enemy responding, and just making these incremental adaptations. Over time, it was really incredible to see the math just reflect how much more proficient we became as an organization. And I think for business, I mean, that's the biggest thing that I learned is that, we like to say no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Well, in business, no plan survives first contact with customers. And certainly, I could walk through the whole troop swap to IDME thing, but I was using the same principles that I used over in Iraq, with the business.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people maybe don't realize about the Army is, after every action, every contact, leaders go through and the team goes through that after action review, and really figuring out and everyone having a thick skin and talking about, hey, what went right and what went wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, it's all about getting down to root cause analysis. Even the best unit can always do certain things better. And so, everyone likes to pick out the two or three things that we did the best to figure out what we did well, so we can keep doing them. And then, what are the areas that need improvement that ultimately, could get somebody killed, and how do we fix that and make sure that we're more successful the next time out?
So you continue to get high value missions. Now, did your unit stay in kind of the Mosul area, or did you kind of move throughout Iraq?
Yeah, we moved throughout Iraq. So December of '06, the brigade got repurposed as a surge strike force and moved down to Baghdad. So my platoon, because of our performance, brigade commander had designated us as the brigade high value target force of choice. So when the brigade got repurposed and moved down to Baghdad, we became the surge strike force, which meant that they were just flexing us to the different hot spots throughout Iraq. So we did a number of raids, Lake Tartar, the outskirts of Fallujah. And then when we got to Baghdad, we were really, actioning targets across the city. Went down to Karbala briefly to action some targets down there after the Iranians, the Al-Quds guys, overran the JCOP outside of Karbala and kidnapped and executed a few Americans, unfortunately. But had the luxury again of a great mission and a great team, and so success rate kind of continued to go up until I think it was April, May, started to get by name requests from division, and then eventually had elements of JSOC reach out to us and had a few special operators embedded in my platoon for the last 2 months of our tour.
So JSOC, for those of our listeners who maybe don't understand, that's the Joint Special Operations Command.
Yep, that's correct.
And you talked earlier about a quote from General Petraeus. I'd heard that after the war, after you got back, you actually had a chance to meet General Petraeus.
That's right. I did. His memory is incredible. He went through a 45-minute speech without searching for words, except for maybe one or two times. Gave the most concise and articulate overview of the history of the Iraq War. It was really incredible. And so, I'd met him once or twice in theater, but I went up to him afterwards and introduced myself. Just, hey, sir, served under you in 2007. And he goes, "What unit were you in?" I was like, 3rd SBCT. He goes, "You guys had a hell of a tour." And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Well, what battalion were you in?" As a recon platoon leader for 2-3. And on the spot, he goes, "You're the ones who developed our daylight TTPs for HVT raids." And I was like, "Yes, sir." So reached in, gave me a CIA coin, which was pretty neat.
So what, I'd read another article that, during your time in Iraq, you had a platoon sergeant, or maybe, and you can tell me if this is something you want to talk about or not, but
no, it's fine.
A platoon sergeant, for those of our listeners who may not know, that's the senior non-commissioned officer in the platoon, was relieved while you were there. What kind of leadership challenge did that pose for you?
Yeah, I think. Well, there's a number of leadership challenges. If there's any one thing that still, just I hated for the guys to be around, it was that sort of friction, especially because, I know how good the relationship can be between, a platoon leader and a platoon sergeant, and the effect that it has on the platoon. But if anything, there were just some issues about honesty that cropped up pretty early on, just as far as like equipment inventory, where I knew that there were some problems with the math that was being turned in, and didn't even care if I had to pony up and pay for a few missed items, that would be fine, but knew that there were kind of honesty and integrity issues early on. And then, ultimately, it culminated into things that threaten the lives of the guys in terms of moving equipment around. I'd given an order that the electronic jamming equipment that we had in the platoon was not to be moved from one truck to another unless we had a tech out there to proof it. And that didn't happen, which bothered me, because you move a life-saving piece of equipment like that, don't do a check on it by someone who's certified when you're out. That's what can make somebody come home in a box. And then so I think, if anything, from a leadership point of view, I was young. I was very loyal to him because I wanted to have a great relationship with my platoon sergeant. I think most platoon leaders do want to have a great relationship with their platoon sergeant, but ultimately it had gotten to a point where it had just totally sapped the morale of the platoon. I couldn't trust him, and when that happens, when the two folks who are responsible, in equal parts for running a platoon, have a fractured relationship, eventually went to the company commander and said, whether it's me or him, this has got to stop, because somebody's going to get killed if the situation continues, and Thankfully, they did a sensing session for the platoon, and based on the outcome of that, he was relieved, which paved the way for a more stable environment for the guys.
Is there a takeaway from an entrepreneur that's maybe starting a business, or a business owner, a business leader, that they could take away from that?
You know, I think I think the takeaway that I've got, and this is something that's been especially true for business, where if something just isn't working out, it's not necessarily the fault of the other person. Usually, it might be your fault as the entrepreneur because you hired a person who's got the wrong skill set.
Mm,
Maybe like you need somebody you can go out there and get deals, and you end up with a guy who likes to get down into the fine weeds, to work out all the different clauses of what the deal should be. But he's not the guy who's going to be out there hunting. He's more like the farmer and the relationship guy. And I think that after 30 days, you generally know if it's going to work out or not in a startup environment.
mm,
And if you prolong a situation that is obviously unhealthy, you're just doing everyone a disservice. I mean, I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who's like, I just knew this guy wasn't going to work out after 30 days. And then all of a sudden, everything just turned around and it was fantastic. Like I've literally never heard that at all. And so I think if you do your job right, if you set expectations and you say, coming in, this is what I think success looks like. And, 30 days from now, if this is kind of what our relationship looks like and this is where we're at, then, we're on a great path. But if we're not there, we should talk about whether or not, not only is a startup right for you, but if this particular startup is right for you.
mm.
I think if you do that well, nothing should come as a surprise at the end of that trial period. But really making sure that people's expectations are managed is really critical. But it's the whole hire slow, fire fast, kind of adage. It's true, but it's incredibly hard to do if you've never had to kind of let somebody go.
Absolutely. So you spent how long did you spend in Iraq?
Was there for 15 months. So we went over in July of '06 and came back in September of '07.
So you came back in September '07. Then you served about 4 years.
I served 4 years active duty, and then I served 3 years more in the reserves, supporting European Command out of Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
So you got out as a captain.
Mm-hmm.
And after you got off active duty, kind of what was next for you?
Well, it was tours winding down in Baghdad, and I walked into my commander's office, Barry Huggins, who I follow that man into hell driving a truck full of gasoline. I love him. He's amazing. He took a chance in me when no one had any business taking a chance in me, and I was like, sir, I've given a lot of thought and think I can make a bigger impact out of uniform. Want to go get my MBA. He had some colorful language for me. So once that once that died down, then he's like, "Well, I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation unless you apply to Harvard Business School." And I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" I was like, I haven't used a 3-syllable word in the last month. Like I lead a pack of wild men. This is crazy. And he goes, a deal's a deal. And so it was nuts. Just I ended up applying in December, and then I got accepted in the beginning of March. And just a few months later, I was in Boston, Massachusetts in June.
So you got your MBA from the Harvard Business School. Kind of
Mhm.
what did you do next, or kind of what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I got into HBS. A lot of really talented people there. From pretty amazing backgrounds. The guy sitting next to me was like a silver medalist from the Olympics.
Wow.
Mogul skiing. The guy sitting behind me had done like a documentary on sex trafficking in the Philippines, and then had set up a scholarship fund to like rehabilitate the victims of sex trafficking back.
Wow.
And so you listen to these introductions from these incredible people who at a very young age have just achieved so many wonderful things, and it really humbles you. While I was there, I met another ranger, Matt Thompson, and Matt is just a fantastic guy. He was raised by a mom who worked 3 jobs. He enlisted on his 17th birthday,
Wow.
and then was accepted into West Point and also into VMI, but went to VMI because his mom had been diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately. So, of course, he is the top cadet or first captain at VMI.
Huh.
He was the honor graduate of his Ranger class. He's the only Ranger I've ever heard of. He peered 100% in the first two phases of the course, which means that every other Ranger in his squad and platoon picked him as the top Ranger among them, which is just unbelievable.
Wow, never heard of that.
Yeah, yeah, and then he's done 4 deployments. His first one was with the 101st. He was nominated for the Bronze Star with Valor for leading an assault to capture a bridge. They were under small arms fire right before they're about to cross it. He hears over the radio that the bridge is supposed to be rigged to blow with explosives, and they barricaded it so he can't drive across in a vehicle. So basically, he has to dismount his platoon, and on foot they moved across that bridge where any the next step that lands, he's expecting the whole bridge just to go up and like his whole platoon to disappear. But leads his platoon across the bridge under fire. They make it, secure the foothold. Battalion moves through after he gets the foothold in the farther bank. So just one example of what Matt's like. He's nominated for the Bronze Star with Valor. So is his lead squad leader. He pulls his own packet because he thought that only one Bronze Star with Valor award would be approved, and he wanted his lead squad leader to get it. And he would never tell me that, but one of his guys told me that at a Wounded Warrior event that he organized. So pretty much like the best guy that you've ever met. And Matt and I worked at McKinsey & Co. in Atlanta between our first and second years. And, I basically had a moment where I was looking at this Excel spreadsheet, and it was like 8 o'clock on a Wednesday. I'm on the 60th floor of this office tower, and I looked over at Matt, and I was like, dude, 18 months ago, I was leading a joint task force in Baghdad hunting Al-Qaeda affiliated vehicle bomb cells. I was just like, I don't know if I can. So that was really the kind of epiphany for me that life is short. You never know when it's going to be taken away from you. And we were both coming from an experience where, with very little training for the actual mission that we were carrying out, but a group of talented people, we were able to lead groups to an extremely high level of proficiency. And as we were driving back from Atlanta, I called Matt, and we had the conversation that led to ID.me. And the initial question was, there's all this goodwill for service members and vets. How do they prove who they are while they're online so that they can access some of these benefits? That goodwill has sort of a funnel or a channel to reach the community. And really, from that conversation, that's what has ultimately led to ID.me.
I saw an interview that you did on YouTube, and just kind of want to hit you up with this quote a little bit and see what you think about it. But you said make big bets on yourself. Can you talk to us about that and kind of what that means to you?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there are so many of my classmates who are smarter than I am. Intellectually, there's classmates of mine who are emotionally smarter than I am, who have more industry expertise. But at the end of the day, life rewards people who take risk and who aren't afraid to kind of learn while failing. And I think it takes a specific personality as an entrepreneur to be comfortable with that. Like nobody likes to fail. And as an entrepreneur, you're going into a field where the odds are so stacked against you. But if you really want to control your life and you only get one shot at it, you have to make big bets on yourself early. If if you want to chase your dream, and even if it doesn't work out, at least you can say that you gave it a shot, right? You chased your dream, and maybe that's enough for you. But I think for me, I love entrepreneurship. I love the challenges it provides and how stimulating it is. And I know for me, this is what I'll do for the rest of my life. So hope my wife is all right with that. Yeah.
Well, I think that'll really resonate with a lot of people that are listening today. So you and Matt, you come out and you start. What's the company that you start, and can you talk to us about some of the pivots that you've made to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first theory, when we first starting out, we were looking for a way to connect the community, and we actually thought, if we could start almost like a classified play and get some Fortune 100 military focused financial institutions to distribute that platform, that would be a really interesting way to kind of get around the network effect problem. But after some discovery meetings with some of those institutions, where we were like, "What's your timeline for kind of moving on this?" And they go, "Well, fast is 18 months, and normal is 24 months," which is just crushing. I mean, it's crushing for an entrepreneur to hear that, especially when who I was not familiar with kind of enterprise sales cycles and everything else. So, armed with that feedback, said, okay, well, the one thing that we've seen that's going to be core to serving this community is verification. So we went to one of those, military-focused financial institutions and said, if you guys could set up a verification system, then we'd at least have real-time coverage to verify military status online, which is something that we knew from some of our conversations with brands was a problem. So got that financial institution to agree to set up a web service, and then also discovered where's the data for the community and the government, and it might surprise you, but DoD data only goes back to about 1985.
Oh wow.
So then even if you can figure out where that data is at, for the older generation of veterans, a completely different government agency that holds that data. So as we were kind of working out how to get access to data, we'd said, well, there's all these kind of military discounts, promotions already all across the country, but you don't see it online. And so we saw like Under Armour is offering 10% off in store, not offering it online. Sears is offering different military programs. I think everyone around Veterans Day, from Outback to Applebee's to Ben and Jerry's, offers all these promotions, but veterans don't have an ID card, right? So you got guys bringing in their DD-214 with their social security number and their blood type in order to get 10% off and like a bloomin' onion, right? Which to us, we actually looked at the math and we saw that veterans were at a higher risk of identity theft because of some of the inefficiencies in credentialing.
So for some of those, for our listeners, real quick, the DD-214 is just the piece of paperwork that says you have been honorably discharged from the United States military, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So 40 of the 50 states have now passed legislation to try to get a veteran's identifier on the driver's license, because the only form that every veteran has is one that's got all the sensitive information that DD-214. So we talked with some marketers and said, why aren't you offering these programs online? And they said, look, we'd love to offer these programs online, but without a way to verify the eligibility of an individual who wants to claim them, we expose ourselves to significant risk of fraud and abuse. If we put a tick box in our checkout flow that says save 10 or 15% off if you're military or student or a teacher for that matter, where it's the web and people are disinhibited. So we said, okay, understand that you want to keep these programs limited to brick and mortars because you're able to verify credentials. How could we solve that? And our first hypothesis was we would form a destination website called troopswap.com, and if we gated it, that destination website would become kind of the gated garden for all these military and veteran programs where folks could go online and access these benefits. What happened was when we deployed the real-time verification in August of 2011, we had 3 Fortune 500 brands reach out, and they said, love that you've got this distribution platform. That's always nice when you can drive more traffic to our programs. But what we're really interested in is we're interested in the data. And would you be willing to open up a data feed or an API where we could verify eligibility of these groups directly on our own channels? And as we kind of, took in that feedback, just like I did, when I was a combat platoon leader, I had a tactic or a technique that I thought would be effective. And then, of course, there's a curveball. And so you kind of come back and you talk about it. And we were like, man, a PayPal for digital identity is kind of a neat concept where users would have control of their identity online and on a case-by-case, brand-by-brand basis decide if they wanted to release certain fields of information about themselves, and to do it in a way that's privacy enhancing. So the only information shared would be relevant to that business field. So you don't have to share your social or your blood type, to save 10% off from the odd, retailer who's trying to. We built, what really is a PayPal for digital identity. And it took us the better part of a year. We launched it with Under Armour. It's in their checkout flow right now, Troop ID. And the basic concept is that no matter where you access us on the network, whether it's Under Armour, Overstock, Veterans Affairs uses our technology now. Once you verify your status once, you can then use that single sign-on to rapidly re-verify your status to any other brand that's got the widget on their mobile app or their digital channels. And that was so successful. When we launched, we signed up 48,000 users in the first 45 days with just Under Armour, Veterans Affairs, and Telluride Ski Resort. And so knew very quickly that obviously we'd hit product market fit. We were solving a real need. We were doing it in a scalable way. And then negotiated with Vuxon and Predrag from the government of Montenegro to acquire the ID.me domain, because with all the success of the program, there were brands that said, can you verify first responders? Can you verify students? And we realized that we'd built the infrastructure to serve all those communities. So I think from a leadership perspective, we thought we were in the kind of military benefits space when we first started. Uh-huh. It turned out we were actually in the digital identity market, much different. And so now that we've kind of gone down to the root problem that is really affecting innovation, we're basically trying to be the trust layer for the web, and especially for retailers.
So it started with the military. So now you have the ability now with ID.me to not only military, students, first responders, and then any other kind of subgroups within there now that you can really start really under that main umbrella, really start digging down into even more subgroups, right?
That's right, Scott. So literally, just today I was at a Department of Treasury and White House roundtable where the new SEC rules are going to allow for general solicitation of funds through like crowdfunding sites in exchange for equity. And one of the requirements in the new SEC rules is that an issuer is going to have to verify that every one of their investors is an accredited investor. And so that is something that we might do in the future. Is we might actually allow you to attach your accredited investor status to your ID.me account, so that if you're going onto a platform like an AngelList or a Gust, that you could verify that that's true about yourself as well, in order to satisfy the SEC requirements without having to go through kind of like multiple siloed processes where you're giving away your financial history to lots of different parties.
So as we're recording this right now, ID.me is actually in the Wall Street Journal Startup of the Year. I think you're I think last I checked, at least today, you're in the top 10 startups of the year. And then you were talking kind of before we started recording, some other accolades that you guys have going for you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, very excited. We're also a finalist for the President's National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and it's a really great program. It's administered by NIST and the Department of Commerce, and the mission of NSTIC is the acronym. If it's government, it's got to have an acronym. I'd be surprised if it didn't have an acronym. But the mission is to make online identity and interactions more secure, trusted, and privacy enhancing. And hard to be against those principles. So what our proposal is, for NSTIC is ultimately to take the distribution model that we have with retailers and ultimately allow a veteran to remotely access their medical information or their claims information from the VA by upgrading the accuracy of their Troop ID credential through the ID.me network.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. It'll be super exciting. It's a big problem to bite off, but we're confident that we'll solve it faster than the government would if left to their own devices. So.
Well, I know it's late. I know the life of an entrepreneur is is somewhat 24/7. But
Yeah.
just to kind of wrap this up, is there any kind of pieces of advice you'd want to leave? Someone listening to this podcast, whether they're an entrepreneur or someone that wants to be an entrepreneur, anything you would kind of leave them with?
I think the biggest quality, if you want to be an entrepreneur, and again, it's not for everybody, but if you are a glutton for punishment and you want to go for it, then I think the biggest thing is to be accountable to yourself before anyone else can kind of point out flaws. I mean, you always need people around you that are sounding boards, of course, but I think you need to be your own worst critic and to hold yourself accountable for performance, because that's the way that you get better. And if a leader has that, if an entrepreneur has that kind of feedback mechanism where you make a decision or you set a plan, and into that plan you realize that it's not working, you need to be very honest about that. Don't be stubborn. Do not try to convince, don't try to convince the market that it's them that's wrong and it's your idea that's right, because if you do that, you're gonna fail. And I think having a certain level of just honesty and transparency with yourself, with the people who are around you, um, and then building off that base to say, well, here's what we thought was true. We failed. The plan didn't work. The plan never works, by the way. But here's what we validated, and what we validated is really exciting because that allows us to set up a new experiment, a new assumption for how to go forward and how to get better. And I think if you have that level of self awareness and ability to be honest with yourself and to say a lot of mini failures can lead to great success. I think that's what's terrific about this country and about entrepreneurship. And just don't wait too long so that one failure ultimately makes you actually fail.
Well, thank you for that, and again, I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for raising your right hand post 9/11, knowing what you were getting into. So thank you for that. And how can someone listening find out more about ID.me and find out, and how could they connect with you?
Sure. They can go to www.id.me. My email is blake@id.me. So, I always encourage anyone who uses a service, to reach out at any time if they've got feedback or suggestions. But, other than that, vote for us in the Wall Street Journal Startup of the Year competition. And thanks for listening.
Absolutely. We'll have the links to all that so you can vote for ID.me and in the show notes. And Blake, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And if there's ever anything that we can do for you, please let us know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott.
No, thanks a lot. Hey, appreciate it.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care now.
Hey, take care.
Bye.